Welcome everyone to Mythinformed with your hosts Brian and Dimitri. Today we have with us Lalo Dagach, commentator on international politics, religion, and culture. Lalo has been on the Dave Rubin Report, is great friends with former MythCon speaker Melissa Chen, and currently hosts the Lalo Dagach podcast. Welcome, Lalo.
Thank you for having me on, guys.
Did we get the name? Did we get the name right?
No, that was great. Lalo Dagach, yeah.
It's like a WWE.
Dagach.
Yeah.
That's cool. And we also have a special guest, an otherkin, known as Lily, who is a dachshund and Chihuahua mix. Actually fostered by Erica, a woman in our group who is nice enough to foster puppies, at least temporarily, from the Humane Society here. So utterly cute.
Well, it's our unabashed attempt at increasing our viewership.
That's right.
Wink.
It is. And they say it's she, but I don't know what pronouns Lily likes, so I'm just going to use that. Right. So my apologies if you're non-conforming, Lily. She does have cute puppy breath, though.
Of course.
So she's going to hang out with us a little bit as a shameless attempt to get viewership.
Lalo, next time you're just going to have to be in the studio with us.
That'll be fun. Yeah. By the way, what you mentioned, like non-conforming gender, I don't know what. So I'm in Chile right now. This is where I live. And sometimes things like that, the terms you just threw out, I sometimes try to translate them and explain these things to people in Chile. And they just look at me with, wide eyes, like, what is this? This can't be a real thing. Like, just gringos be crazy kind of thing.
That's awesome.
But what does the non-conforming community do in Chile? Where do they go? What pronouns do they use?
There are issues of, for example, of homosexuality and trans issues like anywhere else. But I think sometimes people are so oppressed still in underdeveloped countries that they're just still looking for basic rights. And maybe it's because the United States is such a free place that people just don't know what to fight for anymore.
Right. I mean, that we're so privileged that we can make our first world problems into like real social justice problems.
Well, that's something I think I don't often hear people in the United States take into account. For example, there's so much talk of privilege, correct? And it is true. I'm not saying it's not completely true that you don't have certain times of privilege between races or gender, et cetera, but you also have to take into effect you have simply American privilege.
Yes.
Just the fact that you're in America means you're more privileged than the overwhelming majority of people in the world and in the history of the world.
Absolutely.
And so you have to kind of put that in perspective. Like, yes, well, there are privileges in our society, but at the same time, everyone in our society is more privileged than everyone else. Yeah. Most people in the world
are upper middle class by world standard. So our middle class are absolutely wealthy by average world standard.
But does that mean that we need to, kind of create battles for ourselves? Or are we just so high on the Maslow hierarchy of needs that we've just transcended the things that we don't need to fight anymore? And we are on the path that we should be as a society.
I sometimes hear the anti-social justice crowd go too far. I hear them saying people who are not white are completely equal. Women are completely equal in the United States, and there's nothing to fight for. This is just whining. I don't agree with that.
Right.
I think the worst part maybe of a lot of the feminist movement in the United States and Black Lives Matter and other groups is that a lot of what they're fighting for are real problems. And that's very unfortunate because there is an inkling of truth in everything they say. I mean, I used to live in the United States and I went to university in California. Nobody likes dealing with police officers. Nobody likes that. White people don't like that. They're not nice to anyone for the most part. And I think most people in the United States are, if you spoke to them on reasonable women's issues, they would be behind you. But because they always take it too far, because they always go from, when Black Lives Matter first started, I think a lot of people were on their side. You could see it on the news that there was a really egregious shootings of Black people.
Absolutely.
But when you take it to the point where, well, yeah, and also on top of this, all white people are racist no matter what. And Black people can't even be racist. And you start creating enemies of people who could have been your allies. And that's the worst part of it for me, is that they could have gained so much more allies and really created real change if they had kept their message reasonable and not so antagonistic towards other groups.
I saw that video. Was it on your Twitter that you posted where this black lady walks up to the front with to a chalkboard where it says all white people are racist, and then it has her PayPal underneath, and she goes, "Well, you know, this is the conversation we're gonna have. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Y'all are demons."
I mean, it would be I could absorb these messages, right? Because I speak, even though I'm in Chile, I speak to an international crowd, and a lot of my audience is the United States. I could go into every conversation saying, I'm a person of color, and on top of this, I'm more underprivileged than all people of color in the United States because I live in a developing country, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could play these cards and say I'm always right because of this. I could say I can't be racist. Only white people can be racist. These things would help me, but they're not true. And I don't like this thing where I can't be racist, where I'm not held to the same standard as others. I want to be held to the same standard as everyone else. If I say something racist, it is racist. Mm-hmm. But after this, I'm not going to put up also with things that I hear, for example, from people in the alt-right or things like that, saying like there are shithole countries. No. I'm not okay with this either. So I'm fine to be held up to the standard, but I'm also going to hold everyone else up to the standard.
I don't understand why always identity matters so much. I mean, who is more apt to speak on like issues of a woman, like when she's pregnant, like a male gynecologist or a woman that's never had a baby? Right now, the gynecologist could never have a baby, but he's going to be intimately more familiar with the plights of and needs of women in pregnancy than the woman who hasn't been pregnant yet. That's silly, you know. But
again, I kind of have to disagree with that. Like, identity sometimes matters, right? So, can you really know the experience of a black person in the United States if you're not black? You could try. It would be hard. You could interview endless people. You can look at a lot of statistics, but ultimately, you're not really going to live that experience. But and so if you go towards black people and you say, what is your experience in this country? Because of your identity, you learn something. That's true. But you have to always add in personal experience with overall information. So if a person is a Black Lives Matter member and they just say, well, this is my experience and this is the experience of all black people in the United States. No, well, your experience is valid so far. It says something about you. You can add that with how common this is with statistics and things like that, and put it all together. I don't like, people like to take very singular instances, anecdotes, and just throw them in as, see, this is America, this is white people, this is black people, this is Muslim people, and no, experiences do matter. I'm based on identity sometimes, but you have to mix it in with a lot more information.
Right. Well, I'll take your comment about taking things to the nth degree. So, you know, I've heard this statement that you can't use the excuse that you have a black friend to say that you're not, you don't harbor racist tendencies or whatever it is, just because you have one black friend. Well, first of all, we're dealing with statistics and a volume of people. If you have black people, it's 12% of the population, and I happen to not live in a black community. I'm not going outside of me. I mean, I don't, you know, just in terms of good friends in general, most people don't have more than 5 or whatever it is. But of those, what is the expectation that, you know, more than 50% of them are supposed to be black? And at that, then that makes you not a racist because you more sympathize with their plight because now you're friends with them. I don't quite understand that line of thinking. So I didn't know if that was one of the things you were advocating for.
Well, to sidetrack from there, because something occurred to me that I always wanted to talk with you guys about. Sure. Is you guys held an event, right?
Yeah, I think you're talking about the MythCon.
It was a little thing.
MythCon, yeah. So out of the major people, because it was a very protested event online,
yeah.
right?
Well, one segment of it, yeah.
One segment. Yeah. I noticed the major people. I noticed all the major people protesting you were entirely white, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I'm asking, this is what I wanted to ask you. Were there any people who protested your event who were major people, not, you know, small accounts, like major spokespeople speaking out against your event? Were there any people who were not white?
Many were.
Do you know a single non?
I'd have to think about it. I'm not sure.
I mean, most of the political commentators on the SJW side of this house happen to be white. I don't know if that's a coincidence.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I noticed that about the protest against your event. How they
one could call it racist.
Well, I mean, it was odd. We had 3, brownish people on stage, and we were called white supremacists, which, I mean, God, we're the worst white supremacists ever by platforming, that those many and immigrants too.
Well, and women.
And one who doesn't even have citizenship, only a green card. Shame on us.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really bad white nationalism.
We're just not very good at alt-right.
Yeah, we're just bad at it. Like that. Yeah, it was silly to me, and I guess I would try to take the content of what's going on. So there would occasionally you would get something on Twitter barking at you. I don't know if that person's black or woman or white. You don't really know. I'm going on what they're saying, but many of the complaints were just leaping to, you must be a nationalist, you must be a supremacist, you must cater to white men. I mean, how do you know this? And what they're asking about, well, we had a good mix on stage, but if somebody said, oh, well, you only have 2 black friends. Well, what if it turned out all my friends were brunettes? I didn't have a single blonde friend. And that's just the way it turned out. Does that mean I'm bigoted against blonde people and really hate redheads and just don't want to associate with, or does it just happen to work out that way? Like, come on. I mean, you just don't notice. How many of your friends are blonde? Dimitri?
We're all tribalists.
You don't know.
3.
Okay. See, that's the thing. So when you ask me, like, how many were black, I don't know. But I can tell you that the arguments weren't correct. That we're supporting white nationalism, that we're out to, subject women and minorities, and that we're saying that they shouldn't exist. And that's bullshit.
In your sphere, when, I assume you were in Chile while we were running our event, did that come across your stream of news, or, the circles that you hang out in? I mean, did controversy about the event really surface for you?
In Chile? I mean, did it even surface in the United States on the news?
No.
I mean, what are you asking exactly?
It's like Twitter or, the YouTube circles that you live in. I'm just wondering if events that are even remotely perceived as controversial, that don't make it outside of this kind of niche audience, do you live in that realm where this impacted you?
Well, I mean, to begin with, I don't really watch too much YouTube, and I don't really interact too much with YouTubers. I observe very from a distance what was happening with your event, but I don't really see that much value in watching YouTube videos personally. If you've listened to my podcast, I haven't really had on YouTubers. I was a little bit interested when I first started doing social media and Twitter, but I quickly found that they don't have too much more to contribute. It's not usually the most educated people on YouTube. So I'm more of a person who I prefer reading or watching cinema or something like that. So a lot of people I try to look for from my podcast are often authors or activists, actual activists, etc. Some people says that comes off as elitist. I just find YouTube predominantly boring.
Right.
You read?
Well, let's talk about your podcast specifically on YouTube, and it's called the Lalo Dagach podcast. You can find that on YouTube. You do have a blog on WordPress under the same name, but
I hardly use it.
I know.
So I wouldn't go to that.
But your writing for the pieces that are there are good. So I'll compliment you there. But on the
I mean, that's one of the reasons I don't do it very often, is that if I write something, it'll take me months to do it.
Yeah, you can tell they're well refined, well researched. But on your podcast, you had on Stephanie, I think Tessier.
Yeah, that was my most recent one. Yeah,
that was really good, and I'd heard her story before, but I thought you dug into that in a really good way. And she was trapped in Libya. Do you want to give us a quick summary of this?
Yeah, well, I mean, aside from her story, what I try to do in my podcast, and I guess it's because I studied film, that I have this mentality of almost treating my podcast like a movie, where I want it to have a narrative, a beginning, a middle, an end, and a climax, and etc. So I try to get the person to tell their story in a very autobiographical kind of way, where I get their personal background, the events of their life, and try to get it out there as truthfully and as directly as I can. And in her case, she was a Canadian citizen who had married a Muslim from Libya. His family was from Libya. They had 2 daughters in Canada, and basically she had
Canada, right? Huh? They were living in. So she married a Muslim, but they were both Canadians.
They were both Canadian. So he was Canadian, but also a Libyan citizen. And basically, she had become very Muslim at some point. She was a convert,
ethnically Canadian,
not from a Muslim family, and she at some point felt that they were restricting their daughters too much and wanted to live more secular lives. And this led the husband to say, well, I want us to move to France because I got a scholarship or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And I want to first visit Libya to visit family. And when they get to Libya, where they're only supposed to be for a week or 2, mm-hmm. he drops it on her that we're never leaving. You have to stay in this country. When there's nothing waiting for us in France, and I want to bring up my girls here. And I think it's very hard for people in the West who don't know how the rest of the world works, is that, well, what do you mean she can't, they're not leaving? She can just get on a plane with her daughters and leave. Okay. And no, in a Muslim majority country where the law is dictated by Sharia law, mm-hmm. she cannot just get on a plane with her daughters and leave. In some countries, she would not even be able to leave, even though she's a Canadian citizen. I think in her case, she said she could leave being a Canadian citizen, but her daughters, being the daughters of a Libyan man, mm-hmm. could not get on a plane and leave if she just wanted to. They needed absolutely the permission from the husband, which he would not give.
Which I don't understand why she didn't just take her daughters to the Canadian embassy. Couldn't she?
Did. I'm sorry. No. She called the embassy. So okay. Aside from her, this story is not unusual. Mm-hmm. This is not the first story I've heard like this. This is not a one-off occurrence. There's a very famous story that I wasn't aware of, and I was very surprised because I've seen every movie imaginable. I'd never heard of a movie called Not Without My Daughter.
With
Sally Fields.
Yeah, I when I was a kid.
And it's the story of a real person, and this really happened to her, named Betty Mahmoudi, who in the 70s, 80s, early 80s, let's say.
84.
It was 84. It was after the revolution in Iran, because she married an Iranian in the United States. He did the exact same thing to Stephanie as in that movie. He said, I want to visit Iran with my family. They get to Iran. And he says, we're not leaving. I want our daughter to be brought up in this country. And so automatically the daughter is an Iranian citizen, and Betty Mahmoudi, played by Sally Field in the movie, is automatically an Iranian citizen. In the movie, Sally Field goes to the embassy of the United States and says, oh, thank God we're here. Okay, I'm an American citizen. I want to leave the country. Like, we can't leave the country. How would they leave the country? You have to go to an airport, and you have to go through the immigration of the country. And they're not going to let you through because you are not just an American citizen anymore. You are automatically, being married to an Iranian, you are an Iranian citizen. And to leave the country as an Iranian citizen, as a woman, you need the man's permission. So in my naivete, before talking with Stephanie Tessier, not having seen Not Without My Daughter, another woman named Jennifer Sutton, who the same thing had happened to her. Mm-hmm. She married a Pakistani, but I forget the country this happened to her too. But I've talked to more than one woman this has happened to. I thought that if you're in a country like that, underdeveloped Muslim majority country, and you're an American citizen, and you go to the embassy and you say, I'm being held here against my will, I want to leave, SWAT teams will call him in, international helicopters, they're going to land, they're going to fly you out, you're going to get out. No, this is not what happens. And this is happening to hundreds of women all over the world in dozens of Muslim majority countries, where they go against their knowledge that they are not going to be able to leave, and their children are not going to be able to leave, and they get stuck there. And this is not on the news at all. Right. This is not being reported. I've never seen anybody talk about this. I discovered these women very by accident, and I'm shocked that I'm the only one mostly talking about it.
That's actually a question I had. Is you do have very interesting guests on your podcast. How do you come across them? Their stories? I mean, you can't do a Google search for this. So,
you know, a lot of the times they find me because of the comment. I mean, I started doing everything I do now first on Twitter, where I was just giving my opinion on international politics, religion, as you said in the beginning. And I get a lot of new followers, and sometimes they DM me, and I'll get ex-Muslim and people from foreign countries coming to me saying, Lalo, I love what you do. I love what you say. And they start telling me their story in private messages, or they want to Skype with me. And I'm more accessible than I think a lot of other people are. You know, sometimes people just say, oh, I wish I could Skype with you. Well, let's Skype. And they start telling me their life story. I find it very interesting. I'm like, hey, would you just like to record this on a podcast? And sometimes they're desperate to. And somebody like Stephanie Tessier, who was trapped in Libya during the civil war in Libya under Gaddafi, and she has amazing stories. And I think she has more stories than she could even get out on my podcast. And it was the longest podcast I'd ever done, like 2 hours and a half.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm sitting there talking with this person on my podcast, and I'm wondering, why is this person talking to me and not Oprah Winfrey or Ellen or on The View? And not only are they not on Oprah or The View or something like that, they're not on BBC or those other things. Nobody cares about these women. And in a world where you just don't have feminism, you have extreme, you know, over the top, everything is sexist kind of thing, where even an air conditioner is sexist. And, you know, if you look a woman in the wrong way, it's rape and things like that, where it's so over the top. To hear these stories of these women who have just gone through hell and back and nobody cares, I'm shocked that I'm listening to them. Why are, like, they should be so lined up with interviews on major networks. They should not have time for me. So that's one of the reasons I talk to these people. I try to find these people, or they find me, because they know, you know, I have a great story. Nobody wants to hear it. Maybe Lalo will do it.
Right.
It's a privilege, but it's also sad.
To me, that would really be the only solution, is an immense amount of political pressure to solve a problem like that. You know, specifically of her kids, because she's not going to have the rights, especially in Libya. And her only appeal, as I understand it, would be to the Sharia courts. So it would be an appeal to the religious courts to get some reprieve against the government. But the religious courts are going to come up with the same answer, because according to the Sharia, the children are the custody of the man. So there's really no option for her unless there's an enormous amount of political pressure put on.
I mean, she could, if the exact same thing had happened to her, and it had not been a Muslim man, and she had not been in a Muslim country, had that person been white and a Christian, everything the same would have happened to her. She would be on every feminist channel. Ashley Judd would be backing her. All the feminists would be backing her. There would be such outcry, she might actually get her kids back. But because it happened to her by a Muslim man who's a person of color, and it was in a Muslim majority country, not only is she ignored, I don't know if you heard towards the end of my podcast with her, she's like, I'm very pro gay rights, I'm very pro LGBT. She's as liberal as she comes, but she says, I can't support that community because they don't support me. Not only do they ignore her, but when she tells her story, which is the most craziest oppressive story a woman could ever experience in the world almost, they say they side with the husband. They side with the Muslim man.
So she tried going to mainstream media sources, and they refused to broadcast her. Is that the case?
Well, I mean, she wouldn't even get close enough to. I mean, how do you get the mainstream media to pay attention to you?
Right. How do you, like, I want to be on Oprah. Right.
Yeah. How do you do that exactly? And for example, you could start off something with like my podcast, right? That's small, that garners a little bit of attention. My podcast, I know, even though it was a beautiful thing, I'll be proud of that podcast for the rest of my life. That podcast, I know, is not going to call the attention of the BBC and Oprah and things like that. They listen to that and they're like, this is not serving our narrative.
No, I think I agree with you. And maybe what we can say is we should, like, Stephanie Tessier should be a nationally known name, in this pseudo scandal around Aziz Ansari shouldn't be known at all.
Well, I don't know much about the details of that. I know a lot of stuff came out there around Aziza. Sorry,
in the last
I can't speak to it, but considering that those stories are coming out, that kind of every sexual negative encounter is being talked about.
Yeah.
A woman who was trapped in a country where her daughter, and I don't know if we've said this on this show, Stephanie's daughters are still in Libya.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very complicated situation about how she ended up in Canada and the daughters are still in Libya. Basically, the husband said, I'll let you visit your parents, and then you could come back after visiting Canada. So she left Canada thinking she was going to come back. But when she left, he said, I'm not going to let you back into Libya unless you give me full custody of the children in Canada. And so people know, because this might be confusing for people, she cannot enter Libya without the husband's permission. Not leave, not come out, not come back in. That's how patriarchal it is.
Jesus.
Right.
And so she cannot go into Libya to see her daughters unless she gives up all custody in Canada of her children. And in the podcast, she explains more in detail if you guys want to listen to it. But basically, she would lose any recourse of regaining her children if she gave up custody to go back to Libya to see her kids. So it's an impossible situation, right? It's like you could see your kids, but you have to renounce every right you have to them as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
Or you go there, or you stay in Canada, you don't see your children, but you keep the rights of your children.
Yeah, you're right.
I can't imagine what that decision is like at all. But that's the situation she's in.
Oh, and staying married to someone like that who's just a chauvinist monster. I mean, that's a terrible situation. But you end up talking to a lot of people who have these really interesting stories. You had this the lady on from Iraq who talks about being an atheist in Iraq and how that's not something that's
grew up atheist in Iraq, or an atheist mother in Iraq. And I don't know if you heard the part where I asked her, like, so your mother was an atheist in Iraq.
Right.
Would she tell people she's an atheist, like, around Iraq? She's like, yeah.
Well,
so, like that, I was like, your mother's my hero.
The really interesting thing that you guys talked about there is that for a man, you don't wear your religion on your sleeve. I guess maybe on your beard. But outside of that, for a woman, she's got to wear the headscarf. So if she doesn't, that's boom. There you go. There's
well, I have a beard, right? Yep. And I look Arab. So, and I'm not a Muslim. And that's true for a lot of people, right? But that veil, especially the hijab or something like that, they're Muslim. Nothing but Muslim. So there was, for example, in England, I think it was in the UK, there was a girl who showed up in a YouTube video where a person caught on camera a girl basically twerking on the street with some street dancers, and she was in a hijab.
Right. She's fully covered in jeans, just her hands and her face are showing, and she's twerking, right?
Had that been a Muslim, even with a beard, you don't know if it's a Muslim or not, even if he has a beard. A woman in a hijab, she was a Muslim. And so she started getting death threats for what she did, that she was twerking in a hijab. Now, in England, where the law doesn't say you have to wear a hijab, but they say it's a choice. Well, if you can't dance in a hijab, and you'll get death threats if you do it, how is it a choice? So the hijab is made to conceal the woman and also to identify that they are Muslim. And it's a form of control over them.
Yeah. And Stephanie mentions that in her podcast as she was going down like this descent of religiosity. And I called it descent because obviously it ended in this bad place. But she said, we were mostly secular when we started out, but then we started getting into this. We were going to madrasa and we were looking into this. And one of her friends was seemingly an expert that was trained at Al-Hazaz University. So they were getting more and more religious. But as soon as she said, when all the women would go out and one woman would show up without the hijab, rather than talking about the day's events or current events or whatever you normally talk about, the lunch or the dinner would always be about why they're not wearing the hijab. And why don't you realize that this is what Allah commands and that your soul is in danger. And
it's a sad thing that in the West, where it's constantly talked about, women should be able to wear whatever they want. Don't slut shame. Men shouldn't even be critiquing what women wear. And then I hear endless stories from endless women about how, the social pressure that comes with wearing a hijab. Not just that some countries have it by law to wear it, but just that the parents and the society will look at you in a very different way. They might say you can't get married if you don't wear a hijab. To compare this, for example, when they say, well, in the West, women wear a bikini, and in the East, they wear a hijab. It's just culture. No, not the same thing. Your parents are not going to tell you if you can't leave the house unless it's in a bikini, right? You won't get right. Like there's no law in any country that says, according to our law, women must walk around in a bikini.
Well, I just find it insane how we try to rationalize these kind of cultural idiosyncrasies. I think you tweeted recently this MTV Decoded video about the hijab and how there's two girls in the video, and they're kind
Francesca Ramsey and somebody else.
Francesca Ramsey.
She's the host.
They're trying to make it so cool, like, oh, you can wear this and you can wear that, and I don't wear one. And the chick, I mean, it does sound really entertaining, but doesn't talk for a second about the problems around this, the type of headwear and the fact that it's mandated and people die over this thing in other parts of the world. But no, it's super cool. You should totally wear one. I just don't get it.
I just saw a film called Wajda, which is a film made by a Saudi woman, and the film is entirely filmed in Saudi Arabia.
This is good. You have this. I saw this on your Twitter.
And this film is about a very young girl, maybe 12, 13 years old, who wants to buy a bicycle in Saudi Arabia, which is, everyone's telling her that you're crazy because girls are not allowed to ride bicycles. Women aren't either. And there's a scene where she's in religious class and they're reading the Quran, and the whole scene really threw me back because it starts with a girl who's 12 years old, maybe, passing around pictures, and the teacher says, what are the pictures of? She says, oh, my wedding. She's 12. And then they start reading the Quran, and they have to read it as they sing. And the words that they are saying of the Quran are basically like, Muhammad bless us that we must oppose those who have left the path of Islam, and those who follow the non-believer who will burn in hell. Something along those lines. Basically, that people who leave in Islam and follow non-believers will burn in hell. Yeah. And I put up that scene because it's very shocking. But then I made a second comment, which I think is very telling. I told everybody, watch this scene again, but with no subtitles. And if you watch the scene with no subtitles, all it looks like is 12-year-old girls giggling, sharing pictures, and then reading from the Quran while singing it. If you saw that with no subtitles, you think, oh, look, girls are like girls in Saudi Arabia are like everywhere else. They're giggling, they're sharing pictures, and look at this. The music, it's beautiful, and it is, right? They're singing the verses of the Quran. And it's only when you have the subtitles and you get more information that you realize what's happening there and all the egregious stuff. And that's exactly that scene without subtitles is how the left and progressives view Islam. It's so only superficially and with no further information.
Sure.
So that basically the left is Islam for them is a Saudi movie without subtitles. It's just visual, just superficial, no further information.
Yeah, you can take a beater car and give it a wax job. It doesn't make it a Mercedes. Like, right? I mean, that's the problem. You cannot look at the outside of something, on the surface and then make complete judgment. I mean, this is what investigative journalism does, is dig in, ask the hard questions. This is the way it looks on the surface, but don't be fooled. Right? But we don't do that around Islam, and we don't, because I think we're so afraid that they're in that victim class. Well, they're in the progressive stack. We're
Sam
afraid
Harris gets into hot water for this. Bill Maher gets into hot water for this, and they make fun of all. Well, they don't make fun. They critique all religions, but with Islam, it's especially something that somehow has gotten on the far leftist, whatever the opposite of a chopping block is, the support block.
Whatever. It's got an immunity torch.
Thank you. There it is.
It does. Like, so that's a survivor analogy. No one likes my analogies today.
No, okay. That's all right. I'll laugh next time. It's just, it's an interesting phenomenon. But again, with a lot of the things that you share, I think, is it true that the genesis of your content was this, kind of anti-religious, the atheist wheelhouse, which Brian and I are both in, but now it's subtly shifted toward this anti-politically correct politics, which we've also had to pivot in the same direction. And frankly, a lot of atheists have had to. Have you noticed the same thing with your content?
Well, not really. I mean, yeah, I was very interested in atheism before I started getting involved. And it was actually, I had no interest of getting involved. Like, I would read Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins at home, and I was happy not to get involved in this until I noticed the political correctness about Islam. That's actually what got me involved.
Oh. And Sam Harris on Bill Maher, if I remember.
It was Sam Harris and Bill Maher, but my perspective is a bit different from a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
My perspective is that I come from, as you said, my first name, Lalo, is Latino, but my last name, Dagach, is not a Hispanic name. It's very rare last name, and it is Palestinian in origin.
Mm-hmm.
And it is of Christian Palestinians who at the turn of the 20th century, early 1900s, like 1910, okay, my great-grandfather came living under the Ottoman Empire to Chile. Chile, in fact, has the 4th largest population of Palestinians in the world. Something like 5 times more than the United States.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I come from Christian Palestinians, and I'm like 3rd generation atheist. My grandfather is a physicist and an atheist. My father is a physicist and an atheist, and many of my uncles and family are atheists. So I come from a family of very proud atheist, scientifically oriented Arabs. Okay.
Right.
So when I heard Ben Affleck say to Sam Harris, "What you're saying about Islam is racist," I would have liked to have been there and asked him, "What race are you talking about, Ben? Which race do you mean?" Because I know what he means. I know he means Arabs. And I found that really insulting to me and my background. To say, "Oh, those Arabs, they're all Muslim and we need to respect that." No. Sure. Arabs, just like everywhere else, and I know Ben probably believes this about his own country and the religions, the majority religions like Christianity, Catholicism in the United States, that they aren't progressive. It isn't racist to criticize them. And they are very antithetical to most liberal, feminist, progressive values they want to put forward: anti-homophobia, women's reproductive rights, etc. A lot of Arabs like myself who don't have religion want those same things he wants. And it really pisses me off that he hurts us by wanting the same things that he wants for his country under the religious majority of Christians in the United States. He is tearing down the same fight for other people by calling the criticism of Islam racist. And so it's not just that he's wrong, right? A lot of people can say, he's wrong. No, he's way more than wrong. He is hurting people when he says that, straight out hurting them, literally getting people killed because he has a major voice. Somebody like Ben Affleck.
Yep.
Yeah.
And when he empowers Muslims with a lot of authority, when he says that's racist, he's shutting up not just Sam Harris, but tons of other people who want to speak out against Islam.
Yes.
And those people often get killed.
Including women like in those communities, women that don't often have voices inside a Muslim community who want to speak out. But once you defend Islam as a whole, the traditional powers, the people in charge in that community, namely men, are going to get that power. That will silence the minority within that minority.
Although you could make the argument that by saying the idiocy that he did, he put Sam Harris. Sam Harris was already on a national stage, but he was even more in the spotlight after that happened, which is fantastic. And then you had got the conversation going. So while I agree that in essence that commentary is hurtful and counterproductive, or even worse.
Oh, no, that's totally true. But just he's continuously the example of a million people who came after him who do the same thing.
Yeah,
that's true.
That's the thing.
Right. That's the point. Like every other person after him who called criticism of Islam racist is hurting people. And I would even disagree with how politically correct Sam Harris was being at that moment. He said, because what he said to Ben was, well, Ben, we have to be able to criticize bad ideas, and it's not about people. Well, I would say Sam Harris is even wrong on that. It's about ideas and people. There wouldn't be a problem with Islam if there weren't people believing these bad ideas and putting them into action.
Mm-hmm.
So no, not just criticize the ideas, criticize people as well. I have no issue with that. There are horrible people in the world.
The bad idea, I think, is that every time there's a terrorist attack, they rightly say Islam is not a monolith, not all Muslims, and that's true. It's a lot.
Can I add one more thing? It sickens me a little bit, actually, to even hear we need to be able to criticize bad ideas. It's not about people. When is this said, for example, with this thing in the United States that's so important right now about white supremacy? Do social justice warriors come out and say, well, look, it's not about criticizing white supremacists, just their bad ideas. It's not about criticizing Nazis, just Nazism. Do they ever give them that much quarter?
No.
And you know what? They shouldn't. It is about the people as well. Why give this much quarter to Islam?
No.
It's about criticizing Muslims, whoever they are, not just terrorists, even the people who said women should put on a hijab.
Sure.
Them too.
You have a massive scale between like very liberal Muslims that celebrate Eid and otherwise don't really observe, right? But they're culturally Muslim, all the way to the Salafist that is following all the rules and wants to create a caliphate, right? I mean, that's a huge variety. And they rightly say that, yes, not all Muslims. But then anytime a criticism is made of the fundamentalists, they say, how can you insult 1.5 billion Muslims? See, now it is a monolith again. See, that's the problem. They're playing both sides of that coin and they can't do it.
No, not even that much. Sorry, Dima, go ahead.
No, I was going to bring up another example of some another guest that you had interviewed in the past. I think a year ago. It's Imam Tawhidi, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that guy throws the gauntlet down against someone like a Linda Sarsour, and he says, "Hey, come at me, bro. Debate me,
right?
Bring your imams, whatever." And they refuse to do.
He dresses in full Islamic garb. It's funny,
he's not the first Muslim I had on my podcast. Somebody maybe who wasn't social media popular, but I had also Sultan Al-Qasimi, who's a social activist from the Emirates. Very big Twitter account, has a lot of followers in the Middle East. I had him on my podcast. So, and I would say him, there's also a book called Letters to a Young Muslim by Omar Sharif Gubash, who is a Muslim. That book, for example, is more critical of Islam and Muslims and Arabs in the Muslim world than almost anything you'll read from even the most, atheist of atheists. It is very, very critical of Islam and Arabs. And their society, and it's written. And he is a Muslim. He is not an ex-Muslim, and he is not against Islam. Yeah. But he's very critical of Islam, how it works in their society. It's a book I would absolutely recommend. It's not you're not going to get it's not an atheist book, right? So there's some level of appreciation of Islam, but he really lays it all out about how Islam really is functioning in a way that's harming their society, and he opens a door that you wouldn't expect. He's also from the Emirates. Omar Sharif Gubash is actually the ambassador for the Emirates to Russia. He's not just a guy on the internet. He's a representative of the government. So it's not just like Brian was saying that there are liberal Muslims. There are Muslims who are very critical of Islam. Sultan Al-Qasimi and Omar Sharif Gubash, both from the Emirates, very critical of religious leaders in their country, of imams, of sheikhs who have. And they've told me these people have huge Twitter accounts, 3 million people more. If they want to incite violence, they can do it, and they could get somebody killed. And there's a big clash there between people in government who are very secular and Muslim and religious leaders in these countries. And almost we don't know about this conflict. I didn't know until I spoke with these people. So some of the best criticisms you'll see of Islam comes from the Middle East and Muslims, because they have seen firsthand about what happens when Sharia is installed and the religious fanatics win. People, want to look to Douglas Murray, for example, who talks about secularism in Europe,
right?
Look to the Middle East. They've been dealing with this forever, and they are well aware of these problems.
Platform, and like you rightfully said, I mean, who is having these people on their shows? Where's Oprah when you need her to champion the right? But that's not the popular card right now. You want to be, loving of all minorities, and Islam is apparently a minority, even though there's 1.8 billion people in it. What are you gonna do?
Right. Second, or maybe biggest religion. It's close. It's a close second, if not number one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I've been very interested in the reformists that you've had on your podcast, and I think you do some awesome work. But you mentioned, well, that's what
I'm not pro reform though. I'm not pro reform.
Well, no, I mean you have to approach it from both sides. If you can't, it's like Jenga. You can't. You try to pull on a block, it doesn't go. Try to pull another one.
There has to be more than one way.
Well, we're very secular in our viewpoints and in what we promote. I mean, I'm very openly atheist, at home, at work, wherever. But if reformism is the best way to push the needle, then we'll do it that way.
Yeah, it's not though. I'm sorry, it's just not. And I mean, by reform, there's a lot of. I mean, reform can mean a million different things. But what we're talking about right now by reform is basically people taking the Quran verse by verse and saying this means something else.
Yep.
Right.
But change the attitude, though. Isn't that more important? Like to me, the trans activist Blair White, and I don't mean to completely shift the subject. They constantly call her right wing and she's transphobic. She hates herself and that she's a horrible person. But she's done more to normalize being trans for Republicans and those on the right than these lefties would ever do. I mean, they're not going to listen to the crazy left person, but she's a Trump voter.
Yep.
So they're going to, you need both sides. Republicans will maybe convince Republicans about stuff, Democrats. And so you would think people that more reminded for reform might listen to the reformist
no one's listening to them though. No one.
Okay, but
there's not a person. I have yet to find a person who has converted to Reformed Islam. I've asked, and I've even put it out on Twitter. I'd like to interview that person if he exists. He doesn't exist. There's not one.
Well, we don't know that. I mean, there's everyone in Saudi that might be an atheist can't tell us. Right. I mean, there's a ton of these books from Dawkins and Irshad Manji, who is a reformist, that are being downloaded. How many of those people are potentially reformists and want to buy into? How many are atheists?
And when you say convert to reformist Islam, that's something a little. I mean, he's talking, like you just said, you're talking about leaving the religion, but converting to this new religion that you're still Muslim, but every verse in the Quran is liberalized. Not only is that doesn't happen, it's not desirable. It's not. I mean, would it be desirable to take the Mein Kampf and say, well, let's just make every verse pro-Israel? That's not desirable to me.
You could go from being a Nazi to just being a proud German.
This is the thing: is you can't just go cold turkey. So if the argument is, well, today I'm living in Canada and I make my wife wear a hijab every single day, and tomorrow I decide, you know what? Yeah, fine. Maybe I won't. And now she doesn't have to do that. Yeah, I'm still probably a piece of shit, but I've become less of a piece of shit because I've given her more freedoms. So it's a sliding scale in the right direction. I mean, I would think that that's a better argument. Yes, okay. Way less poopy.
So let me put it to you this way. I consider it a bigotry of low expectations for people in the West to think that you need to baby step Muslims into the truth. There was no reform movement for Christianity. The atheists never said Christians, the best way to make them more liberal is for them to convert to some liberalized version of Christianity. It was very firm. I followed it the whole time. It didn't happen. Well, there wasn't this propping up of reformist Christians. No. But one example is, for example, creationism. Creationism, for example, by Richard Dawkins, he never proposed the best way to get people to understand evolution is to get them to believe that baby step them into thinking, well, the earth didn't come about in 6,000 years. It was 100,000 years, and let's baby step them into evolution. No, it was, this is the truth, and we need to push for that. And you haven't solved the problem of creationism in the United States. And I don't see this baby step method with reform.
Religion is more closely related to philosophy. I mean, with science, yeah, take the hardcore step. But I mean, do you really give a shit about a Christian that says, I believe in God, but I am also very pro separation of church and state? Is that person high on your hit list?
High in my hit. It's not about being high in my hit list, though.
I mean, or would you criticize the fundamentalist? See, to me, that's what I'm after, are those that are rigid fundamentalists. If you're going to say you're religious and you believe in God, but you're firmly with separation of church and state, I'm content to say we're on the same side.
Live and let live.
I mean, do you disagree with that?
I completely disagree with that. I don't think that was the case of the atheist movement for a better part of a decade. I don't think they limited themselves to Christians who are just committing terrorist acts. I think, I mean, did you not see how the pushback against Christianity with homophobia, creationism, every little thing, even to the point where Christopher Hitchens was criticizing circumcision?
Yeah,
I agree. And I'm just saying atheism is a big movement, and there's a wide diversity of thought. Well, though that was a gunning, and then those were.
I think again, this is why I call it there's a lot of bigotry of low expectations here. I think Arabs merit the truth as anyone else. If you think that white people in the United States who are Christian, that the best way to push against what they believe is with the truth and not reform and not baby stepping them because they're so dumb. No, just truth. Science is this way. When Neil deGrasse Tyson comes out, he's not thinking, well, I'm going to lose some people if I talk science. Maybe I'll soften science to kind of reformed religious mythology. No, he talks truth. And I think Arabs merit that as well.
Where your end goal is,
and
truth
with your
not living truth.
And Neil, by the way, does baby a lot of people. He doesn't hit them with too much science. He comes at it, and he
won't even say he's an atheist. And he says
that's true. Yes. You're right. You're right on Neil deGrasse Tyson being kind of a wimp. But also, that's one of the reasons I'm very critical of him, because I don't even like that he's that soft. Do you guys like that he's that soft?
No. And frankly,
I don't mind it. I think that there's multiple voices. I think there's some that need to be cutting edge, and then there's others that need to be soft. Yes, I think all are needed.
Lalo, I'll say this. At the end of the day, I probably speak for Brian. We would totally agree with you. In a perfect world, total gun control, and we'd abolish or we'd wipe out religion. People would be smart enough not to follow this BS. But that's not the world that we live in. So baby steps. Let's abolish assault weapons, and let's abolish hardcore religion, or let's fight against hardcore religion. So the example Richard Dawkins that you gave, Richard Dawkins is an incredibly polarizing figure. A lot of people think he's a dick. And so, because he's such a dick, yes, he spews truth, but he loses a lot of people. So people are
some people absolutely love him. I love
Dawkins. That. I don't want to listen to it. Well, I'm not saying myself, but there are people who will take that stance. So now that you've lost those people, how are you going to get that middle ground? Because if we can get, the 10 Commandments out of our state capitals and out of essentially less churches in all of our states, that's already a win. If we can have churches start paying taxes, that's already a win. So if we could take these baby steps, we could push civilization in the right direction instead of this taking 600 goddamn years with the stick approach.
Right. Yeah, you're talking there about things I agree with as far as like practical solutions merit baby steps, right? Like taking 10 Commandments out of a courthouse or something like that. But what I'm talking about is an atheist who believes that religion is bullshit, and then kind of feeling overwhelmed with Islam and saying, well, I'm not going to make everybody an atheist tomorrow. So, hey, there's a guy who's talking about Islam light. So let's go with that because this seems like too much of a big project for me. And the problem is when you promote Islam light, you're promoting homophobia light. You're promoting sexism light.
But you can
promoting mythology light.
Armin talks about this all the time, that you can take a fundamentalist Muslim that no longer believes in God but is still homophobic. So now you have a homophobic atheist.
Or take a look at
the
United States is arguably the most Christian country on the planet.
Right. Not even close, but okay.
I mean, who's more?
It's not even the most Christian in the Americas. It's probably the least Christian country in the Americas.
We have an overwhelming amount of young Earth creationists. We have a zeal for Christianity that I don't live in Chile, but I mean, from my personal experience, I don't know what rivals us.
We have the amount of religious buildings per capita.
The United States has probably the biggest atheist community in all of the Americas.
Oh, yeah, atheist community. But as far as the zeal of the Christians, it's intense. So,
the Christians you have are pretty hardcore. Yes,
they're insane. So what you still have here, regardless of that, is I would say a more or less a respecting community in the LGBT space. Like gays here don't have to fear they're going to get stoned when they leave outside, leave their home. So you can have a Christian light mentality and still be, you want to call it, homophobic light. That's still a better lifestyle than them having to hide in their home.
Yes.
Yeah. So, for example, homophobia in the United States is a great example of that. You don't need reform. So, you got now gay marriage in the United States legal, correct?
Yeah.
You didn't do that. So that wasn't done by saying, well, let's reform the verse in the Bible that says a man sleeping with a man as he would with the woman is an abomination. Atheists didn't ask, hey, let's bring in reformers to reform this verse and make a new form of Christianity. No, they just pushed for civil rights.
But it was a natural progression.
But on the same side, and maybe they are ally in like you mentioned on Ruben, that sometimes we're allies on one topic and we disagree on everything else. But I do think that there were religious Christians that were, pro-gay marriage, that were pushing that. And they were allies of a sort that did move the culture.
Don't hold me to everything I said on Dave's show. That was 2 years ago, and I'm more cynical now than I was before.
And hey, and I'm on your side. Star Trek is way better than Star Wars. So we agree there. But I mean, I just still, and we disagree a little bit on, I just think that, yes, you can have religious allies. Not all of them.
No, I didn't say you can't have religious allies. Like I said, like there are some of the best criticisms you'll hear of Islam is from Muslims. But overwhelmingly, what I hear from those critics of Islam who are Muslim is that reform is not going to work.
Okay.
Almost, I mean, everyone I've talked to on my show, when I asked them about reform, they're like, no, that's not going to work. Omar Sharif Gubash, who's very critical of Islam, what we're referring to now as the reform movement, he even says, no, that's not going to happen. It's not
Zakaria.
Who?
What about Fareed Zakaria and his debate with Sam Harris? I thought Fareed had a lot of good things to say.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I
from what I remember of that program is that he said that
pushing win.
I mean, I can't remember everything I heard, but I just walked away with the general idea that Fareed said that it is a negative thing to even criticize Islam.
I didn't get that. I just thought there were kernels of truth, and that the hardcore atheist thing isn't wholly realistic. That's what I got, and that
no. Forget, like people say, oh, pushing atheism, push truth.
Sure,
truth. I mean, this is the problem with reform. When you promote reform, you're still pushing Islam. You're not encouraging critical thinking. There's no reform message that says think for yourself and don't follow Islam. It's always, I have a new interpretation for you.
But atheism,
that's not critical thinking.
Doesn't subscribe. The social justice warriors, the most hardcore social justice warriors, believe that atheism means X, Y, Z, A, B, and C, and subset 1, 2, 3. And if you don't believe them all, you're not a real atheist. You're a neo-Nazi. So, I mean, I would rather make the Christian of the world less homophobic and still be Christian than move them from Christian to atheist, but they still have the same attitudes towards gays.
Yeah, except that in the history of the world, I've never heard of anything working where a group says, this is the truth, but the only way to get other people there is to babysit them from a lie to less of a lie to the truth.
But
They
truth
only push truth.
Objective. I mean, that's again in these people's minds. You know what we have to fight against is a theocratic state, and so when you have Saudi Arabia, you know, allowing women to drive as of 2018, that's a step in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Has Saudi Arabia become more atheist? I highly doubt it.
Are they still a big problem in religiosity?
You know,
yes.
Well, I talked to a lot of people, as you guys said. A lot of people confide in me, not just ex-Muslims, but Muslim as well. Right. And I find a lot of these people are very big fans of Hitchens, Dawkins, Sam Harris. I've yet to find a single person I've talked to that said I became more secular thanks to reformers.
No,
I can't find it. I'm sorry. Like, if you can find that person, let me know. I'd love to interview them, but I haven't found it.
The pickaxe, right? Like, I think you need a Hitchens, but not everybody can be a Hitchens.
Well,
that's the difference.
Or not everyone will be swayed by a Hitchens. And so you need a Zakaria in order to.
It's kind of funny. I've been talking about this with a friend in Jordan. That it's mostly Hitchens that they really like in the Arab world. You know, but you know why? Because Arabs don't talk like Westerners. They're not politically correct about how they give their opinion. They don't come to the table and say, "Look, I respect your opinion, and this is just what I think." But you know, blah blah blah. No. Arabs are very. It's like this.
You're wrong.
You're wrong, and it's like this. So when they hear somebody speak very vaguely and very politically correct, they don't understand it. They think it sounds very weak. And like, why are you telling me something that you sound like you don't even believe? Yeah. So when Christopher Hitchens comes and he says something very strident and very firm, it sounds like crazy over the top hardcore for us. That's how like Christopher Hitchens talked like how most Arabs talk about anything.
It's brilliant. Yeah. Oh, wow.
So
I need to hang out in Arab countries because
and this is another reason that reformers don't get anywhere really with Arabs. They hear them, they're like, what is this person even saying? I can't listen to this. Even if they did listen to it, which they don't, because another element is that all our Western conversation is not being heard by the East.
Okay.
And Muslim countries. Like,
that's a fair point.
Not at all.
A good one. And a good one. But no, we like this. And that's what I think, that talking is not always about agreeing, but trying to get to the truth. And I think that's what we're trying to do in this conversation. And we would definitely appreciate it. This is good. I like a dialectic rather than we have to agree or disagree on all points. And Lalo, yeah, definitely glad to have you. We hope you come to MythCon because we really think the solution is to share ideas openly, and have that forum where you can do this. And everything is about debate. These kind of conversations. No, Brian, you're wrong because of this. Here's my evidence, and I'm like, well, okay, maybe I need to consider this in return. This is the kind of conversations we want.
Are you going to put me on stage?
You're perfect for MythCon. You should make it to Milwaukee. We'd love it.
What are we going to do?
Are you going to put me on stage with a social justice warrior?
Oh, of course.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
You're very, I like how forward you are. I mean, I think you took that Arabic mentality of directness and just you're running with it. And I fucking love it. I mean, it's very refreshing because we do, you're right. We live in a world of grays and let's hedge what we say because we don't want to offend someone. So yeah, this is it's a good leaf, man. We like it. We loved having you here, and we hope to see you in Milwaukee.
Yeah, his podcast. Check him out, Lalo Dagach, Dagach, on YouTube. They're great interviews. I definitely recommend the Stephanie Tessier one, but there's others that are really good.
It's also on iTunes and all the podcast platforms if anyone wants to listen to it. Thank you for having me on, guys, by the way.
Yeah,
awesome, man. Take care.